Disc 2 of Final Fantasy VII is a serious shift in the game's trajectory. After ending on the sorrow of Aerith's death, following a journey that takes us practically around the entire world, Disc 2 takes us into some pretty desolate alien terrain. We begin traversing the lonely frozen northern peaks near Icicle, and wind up, by the end, even further into remote territory, inside the life stream flowing within the planet, beneath the cerulean waves, above the stratosphere, and even inside Cloud's mind. Disc 2 is a much more technically cutting-edge section of the game, which increasingly blends together CG and real-time rendering, while experimenting with, as of 1997, uncharted territory for open-world 3D exploration. The more mystical and magical settings, compared to the industrialized towns and cities that were common in Disc 1, bring out an immense beauty, one that speaks to the splendor of the planet that the player is trying to defend. From the twinkling caverns and sweeping landscapes seen in the northern region to the tropical haze of Mediel in the south, Disc 2 shows much more natural beauty and wonder. Another element that grows more satisfying and complex is the materia system. By the end of Disc 2, you've gathered so many different summons, spells, and techniques that only then is the full power of the materia system revealed. It's incredible game design, given how you can combine materia and equipment to customize your characters in emergent ways. The game takes a while for you to gain enough ability points to start seeing your materia level up, but once it starts, it rapidly begins to deepen combat and leveling, making it no longer feel as grindy. Though Disc 2 technically features some backtracking, as the party returns to places like Rocket Town, Junon, Mount Coral, and even Midgar, there are enough differences in terms of both action and dialogue that it still feels dynamic, despite this circularity. In fact, yet again, Square kill two birds with one stone, reusing resources while fleshing out a sense of depth at the same time. As Sephiroth's meteor approaches, the denizens of Gaia become more and more distraught. In a way, this makes the world of the game feel more real, as we observe their anxieties build almost in real time. Environmental changes also occur to otherwise static locales, and some of these depend on gameplay outcomes. This works to imbue the world of Final Fantasy VII with a sense of presence and pseudo-realism as these changes occur over time. Another important aspect of Disc 2 in this regard are the number of minigames, which break up the monotony while ensuing a sense of full-scale adventure that arguably goes beyond your typical RPG. In one early section, for example, Cloud must ascend the punishing peaks of the frozen north, and the player is shown this, not told it, via gameplay, by way of several special scenarios, all of which require you to monitor Cloud's body temperature, while carefully navigating through all blotting blizzards. In a different section, your party has to subvert Shinra's plan to harness huge materia in a cross-country chase that can change its outcome depending on how successfully you chase down a submarine or halt a speeding train. There's also the mini real-time strategy game of Fort Condor, where halting Shinra's advance requires matching type against type to defend the reactor, and in the process, protect the Condor's egg long enough for it to hatch. How well you've practiced this throughout the game will largely determine how ready you'll be for the final showdown there. And all of these flexible scenarios involving Shinra's acquisition of so-called huge materia can result in you obtaining the materia instead, which, once it's safely secured inside Cosmo Canyon, can be revisited throughout the rest of the game to power up each specific materia type. And though they're less essential, other in-depth side activities in Disc 2 can go a long way to assisting your fight against both Shinra and Sephiroth, from breeding and racing chocobos to fighting in the Gold Saucer combat arena. Combined with these are other optional activities like underwater exploration, hunting down your party's best weapons, and perhaps most dauntingly of all, taking on the kaiju-like so-called weapons, giant Godzilla-esque beings that require serious firepower to defeat. The centerpiece of all this in Disc 2 has to be the story arc of Cloud Strife, which honestly may be one of the most compelling and subversive in all of gaming. Cloud begins Final Fantasy VII little more than an archetypal badass with a bad attitude. In a way, he resembles at first the standard 90s game protagonist, in that all he knows or cares about is fighting. Cloud is a living weapon, yet the more we learn about this persona of his, the less of it we discover really exists, even within the world of Final Fantasy VII. The game uses the medium itself to subvert one of its own cornerstones, namely the player's identity. The very definition of a role-playing game is you assume a persona, yet FF7 turns this on its head. Gradually, Cloud recovers his real persona, traces of his actual past. He learns that instead of being the soldier, first-class swordsman that he was first presented by the game as, Cloud is, in some sense, a split personality, a psychological Frankenstein's monster crudely stitched together from the real person he was born as and the dead person whose persona he's adopted, the real soldier first-class officer, whose actual name was Zack Fair. Cloud experiences something like ego death in Disc 2, losing all sense of what version of himself is the really real one. Told by the devious Professor Hojo he's just another clone of Sephiroth, albeit a failed one, Cloud falls into the planet's life stream, and emerges on the other side of the world in a catatonic stupor. For a time, the player has no idea whether Cloud will ever recover from his perma-trip. All semblance of escapist power fantasy gets stripped away here, as Final Fantasy VII scrutinizes through Disc 2 the very inherent logic of video games itself. It's only after a heady, almost psychedelic journey to the center of Cloud's mind, with childhood friend Tifa as his and our one and only guide, that Cloud is reborn with all the right, true memories intact. The transformation of his character may go down as one of the all-time greatest seen in any video game. But Cloud isn't the only character in this game with an amazing story arc. Each character has their own moment of depth and redefinition. Barrett accepts he isn't a leader. Tifa confronts her denial over Cloud's and her own past. Aerith is redeemed from beyond the grave. Vincent gets some closure with Lucretia, the woman he loved and whose death has thus far defined his very existence. Cait Sith comes over to the right side and reveals his true identity. Red 13 assumes his father's mantle. Yuffie gives up on stealing everyone's materia out of loyalty only to Wutai. And even Cid comes to live his space sojourn dream while forgiving his wife Shira. Even Shinra experience a dynamic story arc as they waste all their resources and manpower on a failed gambit to save the planet, ironically by hastening its and their own destruction. Tifa emerges as a central character in Disc 2. Playing as her, you confront one trial and tribulation after another, breaking free from Shinra's gas chamber only to find yourself confronted with the crisis over Cloud's identity. From Tifa to also Barrett and Cid, the game swaps out the player character several times, changing identities in a profound echo of Cloud's own inner identity conflict. The culmination of all this is a parachute jump over Midgar, a sequence that, according to Tetsuya Nomura, the other writers wanted initially to wind up killing off all the other characters you don't select for your current party in. One of Final Fantasy VII's best attributes is the essential conflict depicted by the game over the question of human nature. Disc 2 culminates with the reveal that Aerith intentionally sacrificed herself as part of a ritual, using the so-called white materia, to counteract Sephiroth's use of the black, which leaves it to the planet to decide ultimately whether humanity is worth saving. Are we intrinsically good or bad? Do we have the right even to exist? We'll see these questions given the nuance they deserve through a complete spectrum of personalities in Final Fantasy VII, a spectrum that showcases human nature in all its range and complexity. Disc 2 is really about showing the player that people can change, yet human nature itself never does. For some characters, this essential conceit gets expressed by continuing to make the same mistakes. Shinra, Hojo, and Sephiroth refuse to alter their respective course. or question their own points of view. Either from greed or wanton lust for power, both sides of the Shinra-Sephiroth World War that plays out throughout Disc 2 seem to represent humanity at its worst and most obstinate. But other characters, from within your party to outside of it, like the Turks, find the courage and clarity to eventually change what they can and accept what they cannot. One of the best moments in the entire game happens when the whole party joins in to say, "There's no stopping this train we're on." Even though Cloud isn't really the person anyone thought he was, he insists on honoring Aerith's sacrifice. Barrett explains even if there's no surefire way to stop Shinra or Sephiroth and save the planet, they still have an obligation to try. One of the game's most impressive feats is steadily ramping up its scale. Shinra gradually shrinks as antagonists, as their story winds up as ultimately one of all too human folly. Meanwhile, Sephiroth looms ever taller as the true enemy whose dark designs we have to halt. This gets conveyed precisely because his actual presence in the game is kept scarce, as he haunts us like some terrifying ghost or primal force we'll only really face in person at the very end. All in all, Final Fantasy VII Disc 2 is an impressive follow-up to the first disc. Even though there are less completely new locations after the globetrotting in the original disc, this too takes the player into terrain rarely seen in games of its era, while fleshing out old haunts with new content and newfound depth. All that's left by its stunning finale and its return to Midgar is taking down Sephiroth and hoping that Aerith's white materia will be enough to save the planet and every living thing on it. Until next time, boss.